Hi guys, it's John here, and today we're going to be doing another battery drain test for the Galaxy S22 Ultra. So we have the Exynos here on the left and the Snapdragon on the right, and as always we're going to run through some various tests and see how long each phone will last. I've got these set up in exactly the same way. They're both on 80% brightness and they're on the same Wi-Fi network. They've both got a SIM card in, and all the other settings are exactly the same, both on the Full HD Plus resolution. And we can monitor the temperature here in the bottom right of the screens with the thermal monitor widget. We've got the floating battery widget here in the top left, and we'll start off with a phone call. We'll do some video recording, do a standby test, play some games, do some browser testing, and then just carry on until they completely die. I have put time codes in the description if you want to skip to any particular part, but we'll start off. I will unplug the phones and we'll start off with the phone call. Here we are starting off with the phone call. So this is just a half-hour call between the two phones, and they're both on the H+ network doing HD voice here. So nothing too exciting to report in this test. The Exynos basically ended up using 2% after 30 minutes, and the Snapdragon used up 3%. Right, so next up we move on to video recording here. So this is 4K 30 FPS. And I've just got that video playing in the background so that the phones have something to look at and try and focus on every now and again. So I just feel that's a bit better than recording a blank wall with no autofocus happening. So this just runs for half an hour, and you can see here the phone's getting nice and toasty, both up at around 40 degrees at the moment. The Snapdragon a tiny bit warmer. After 30 minutes finished, the Exynos used 13 and the Snapdragon also used 13%. Next up we move on to the standby test here. So at the end of the standby test here, the Exynos has gone down by 1% and the Snapdragon by 0%. So next up is PUBG, and we can see here that I've just gone into the cheer park and we're just spinning around at the moment just to try and get the GPU to actually do some work. And the temperatures are pretty similar at the moment. Battery remaining also very similar. Now there's not really a massive difference here in terms of temperature or battery life in PUBG. So both phones are very good at PUBG, I'd say. We know that PUBG is well optimized, although it's still not fully optimized for the Exynos. You cannot do 60 FPS on it yet. So these are both just running on the smooth graphics and high frame rate to keep it fair. So after PUBG, the Exynos used 14% and the Snapdragon 15%. So still quite even at the moment as we move into Genshin Impact. And here we can see this is just the character, obviously stationary, but spinning around again just to try and utilize that GPU as much as possible. Now the Exynos does seem to still try and look up in the air, but I do keep moving back down, so don't panic. Both characters are the same, so it's the same number of polygons being rendered for the character, and it's the same placement as well. So the time of day will differ between them, but it does cycle between them okay. And at the end of this, even if the Exynos does go up into the air a tiny bit every now and again, the difference between them in this battery drain is only 1%. So this isn't anything that throws the test. There's only a single percent difference here, and you can see the Snapdragon running at 36. Exynos just caught up to 36 as well. So they're both reasonably warm at the moment. Both at around just over 55%, 56 for the Exynos and 53 for the Snapdragon. So next up is the browser test, and this is Firefox. I don't really use Firefox because I don't like it. It's very slow in my opinion, but this is what Jetstream here works with quite well. As you can see though, it does seem to fail a few times on the Snapdragon and just stop the test. But the Exynos seems to process the test okay, and this is where the biggest difference in battery drain is, or one of the biggest differences in the whole test. So after 30 minutes of sort of simulating web browsing here, the Exynos uses 11% and the Snapdragon uses 15%. So that's a 4% difference increase in the Snapdragon. You can see, however, the results are that the Snapdragon does run this test quicker than the Exynos, so that could obviously be why it's using up more battery. However, I haven't noticed any lag using my Exynos day-to-day browsing the web, so take that as you will. I'd rather have better battery than use more battery and not notice any difference. So next up we move on to Instagram Reels here, and this is 60 minutes of just scrolling up. So this is constantly playing videos and using the Wi-Fi obviously. We can see here the phones, again, they've started to cool down a bit now. They've gone down to 33 and 34 respectively, and the Exynos is still ahead here with 38% battery. That's a 6% difference compared to the Snapdragon. Okay, so after Instagram we move on to Reddit, and this is just constantly scrolling and scrolling. So for the final part of the test, we move on to a YouTube playlist, and this is a high quality playlist, and I mean high quality video, not the actual content itself necessarily. Trying to protect your soul. So this is where we finally say goodnight to the Snapdragon, and it finishes with a very respectable 7 hours and 45 minutes. Now the Exynos still has 13% remaining when the Snapdragon has died, so let's just see how long this can carry on for. And there we go, the Exynos has finally died with a very nice score of 8 hours and 24 minutes. Okay, so here are all the results in a table, and we'll just quickly go through them. So we start off with the 30-minute phone call here, and not really anything to write home about here. There's just a 1% difference between the two, Exynos using 2 and the Snapdragon using 3. Next up, surprisingly, a 30-minute 4K 30 frames per second video. We use the exact same amount on both, that's 13%. I was expecting the Snapdragon to use a bit more because it does seem to get a bit warmer, but it didn't. It did keep up and just use 13% as did the Exynos. So the standby test, the Exynos went down, or at least the battery percentage went down by 1%. I wouldn't say it used 1% particularly whilst in standby for half an hour, but obviously we did tick over to 83 during the test, so the Snapdragon was potentially lucky there and sticking at 84, so we've got a nice 0% used score for the Snapdragon. Next up was PUBG, and again very similar performance on both phones, just 14% used and 50% used on the Snapdragon, and again we're very close here, 70 and 69. Genshin Impact, again we're still very close between the two, just a 1% difference in battery drain between the Snapdragon and the Exynos, so you could argue that the Snapdragon has a much better GPU and therefore is probably working better than the Exynos, or you could also argue that the Exynos with its AMD GPU is actually working harder than the Snapdragon because it hasn't been well optimized for Genshin Impact especially, so it's actually probably running at a much higher clock speed GPU wise than the Snapdragon. Either way, not a huge amount of difference at all, just a single % in the Genshin Impact test. Next up is the browser test here, and this is where one of the bigger differences in the test came. So 11% used in the Exynos and 15 in the Snapdragon, and again you could argue that the Snapdragon is performing better and therefore using more battery, but you would also see during the test that the Snapdragon had a lot of errors and stopped during the test whilst the Exynos was carrying on, so you could argue either way really, that the Snapdragon had an advantage or the Exynos, but at the end of the day the difference was 4% between them, and we then moved on to the Instagram test. So this test used 12% on the Exynos and 13 on the Snapdragon, so again not a huge amount between them, just running videos over Wi-Fi basically, so nothing too exciting there. Next up was Reddit, and just scrolling up on Reddit for an hour, 10% and 11%, so again not a massive difference at all. But we do have this 8% gap now between the two of them as we come up to the YouTube test. So after Reddit we went onto YouTube, like I say, and we started with 14% remaining on the Exynos and just 2% remaining on the Snapdragon. So after an hour of YouTube we ended up with 14% left on the Exynos and just 2% left on the Snapdragon. So again that's a big difference here, that's what, 5% difference here between an hour of YouTube on the Exynos and an hour of YouTube on the Snapdragon. Now we could argue that the Snapdragon got a bit warmer towards the end of its sort of battery remaining, so it may have used up more power during the last sort of stages, but still there is a noticeable difference there between the two in YouTube. So that's where we saw the end of the Snapdragon with 7 hours and 45, and I then went on to Instagram just to finish off the Exynos as I knew that used a fair bit of battery. So you can see that during the test that the scrolling did stop for about 20 minutes or so. If you're not happy with the 8 hours and 24 because you think that the Instagram at the end wasn't working properly, I have reworked out exactly when it would have died in theory. So we can work it out by basically saying that a third of an hour is 20 minutes. So if we divide the minutes by 3 to get 20 minutes, we can divide the percent used by 3 as well, and that gets 4. So 4%. So if the phone had died at 4%, we would be at 8 hours and 20 minutes. So it's basically a 4-minute difference. So it's not really a huge amount, but I will just, I'm just putting this in here in case there's anyone a bit upset about that final bit there. So it would have died 4 minutes earlier had Instagram been scrolling still in my calculations. So we could say, yep, 8 hours and 20, but just to keep things consistent, I will leave it 8 hours 24. 4 minutes isn't really a lot in the grand scheme of things, and that's still a 35-minute difference compared to the Snapdragon. So this is a huge increase from last test that I did in March, where the Snapdragon got 6 hours and 32. It's now up at 7 hours and 45, which is a massive increase of nearly an hour and 15 minutes, and a small increase, but increase nonetheless for the Exynos 2200 of around about just over 20 minutes or so. So nice to see an increase on both, but a huge one there for the Snapdragon. So let me know what your thoughts are down below, and again let me know what your sort of screen on times are that you're getting. It's always interesting to compare and see how others are doing. I know some people live in hotter countries than I do, and some people obviously live in colder countries, so it is quite interesting to see how everyone around the world is doing. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do like and subscribe. Don't forget you can click the join button and become a member, and that just helps out the channel. And again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.